St. Louis has a lot of good stuff going on that make it a great place to live if you're considering moving here, building a career here, raising a family here. Now that being said, there are a few things that are really tough to put a positive spin on. So in this video, I want to talk about 8 things that really kind of suck about living in St. Louis. So I'm going to list them off, and then these are the things I'm going to break down and give some more detail on in this video. Number 1, declining population, mostly in the city and the county. Number 2, small town mentality. Number 3, crime rates. This is St. Louis. That comes up a lot. Number 4, St. Louis is very spread out. Number 5, the public transit system isn't the best. Number 6, personal property tax. Number 7, below average income, mostly in the city. And number 8 is just the complicated government structure and overwhelming number of municipalities. Hey, welcome back to the Living St. Louis channel. My name is Jacob. So let's get right into it. Now, before we start, one thing I've learned you gotta be really specific about when it comes to St. Louis is, are we talking about St. Louis City, St. Louis County, or St. Louis as a greater metropolitan area, which includes 12 counties and almost 3 million people. People love to start debates about when you're talking about St. Louis. Well, you gotta be specific. Now, I'm not trying to come across as a St. Louis hater. Trust me, I love it here. I enjoy my life and I'm happy with the career I've built here, but I try to be realistic. Let's get into it. Now, number 1 is a declining population. This is not new. This has been happening for some decades now, mostly in St. Louis City and a little bit in St. Louis County. We're looking at, a population that is going down every year instead of going up. St. Louis isn't an it city. It is not a super popular place that everyone is flocking to live, to work, to go to school. Now, St. Louis is good for certain careers, certain industries that have seen a lot of growth, but the city and the county are losing people year over year. And what you'll see a lot of in the city is that you'll notice kind of a lot of these abandoned areas that have become dilapidated, worn down. And then you'll see certain pockets where there is a lot of growth and a lot of development and money pouring in to build new homes, new mixed-use commercial projects, parks, entertainment facilities, all that kind of stuff. And there are definitely efforts from some groups to kind of revitalize St. Louis. But the fact of the matter is the city and the urban core of St. Louis has been losing population for a while. Now, there are definitely certain areas around St. Louis that are just exploding with growth. It's crazy. Like if you look at West County, St. Louis County, Chesterfield specifically, an area like O'Fallon, Wentzville, Lake St. Louis, St. Charles County as a whole, just across the river, isn't exactly in the middle of St. Louis, but it's one of those places that is growing super quickly. St. Louis really is not what it used to be. It's lost a decent chunk of the people living here because most of them have moved either into the county or further out west into the suburbs around St. Louis, but the city is shrinking. Now, what's really important, again, to note about that is the city of St. Louis is pretty small. It's like 10% of the people in the St. Louis metro. Like I said, you're looking at about 2.8 million people in all the 12 counties around St. Louis. And hey, by the way, if you are moving to St. Louis, if you would like help buying a house, selling a house, buying a condo, new construction, whatever that is, send us an email or send us a text. My team and I are practicing realtors. We would love to help you with that if you want. That's what we're here for. Making these videos, talking to you guys is the best part of the job. No pressure. That is completely up to you. Now, number 2 about just the greater St. Louis area you might find is there's kind of this small town mentality. St. Louis isn't really a major city. It's more like a really, really big town. And what you'll likely notice if you're moving here is that it kind of has this cliquey feel depending on where you go. People like to stay within their areas. If they're born and raised here, they'll usually stay in the town they're from or somewhere in that area. You will notice kind of this divide in St. Louis County. There's Mid-County, there's North County, South County, West County. It's like people kind of stick in their bubble. There's always the where'd you go to high school question. People will ask you if you're new here, trying to place you in the St. Louis area and get a sense of your upbringing, your financial background, and the type of person they think you are based on where you live here. Even the way you pronounce a certain street or a certain neighborhood is kind of a tell to some people as far as, oh, this person is an outsider. They're either not from this neighborhood or they're not from St. Louis, and it's a way to categorize you. And I know this isn't helpful at all, but it depends so much on where you end up if you're moving to St. Louis, because like I said, every pocket of town has a different group of people that will treat you differently, have their own set of kind of social norms or the way they do things that you'll find. And it's just kind of, you have a bunch of these little neighborhoods that all have a different character from each other. Now moving on to number 3, crime. Now this is St. Louis, and depending on the source you're looking at, oftentimes St. Louis is ranked towards the top of the list, if not the top of the list, as being the most dangerous, the most crime-ridden city in the US. And there certainly is truth to that, whether you're looking at car break-ins, vandalism, theft, homicide. St. Louis will sometimes make those rankings for a reason. You gotta keep in mind, almost all of those rankings are referring to St. Louis, the city. And like I said, the reason that's important is because St. Louis is an independent city, meaning when those rankings come out, they're just talking about the city, which is about 300,000 people. And those rankings are not based on St. Louis County, St. Charles County, any of the other counties around St. Louis, which make up like 90% of the population here. Because like I said, the city is just a sliver of the St. Louis metro area. Here's a fun fact for you. The other city that's like that in the US is Baltimore. So St. Louis and Baltimore are these independent cities. And what happens with that is that they are very small relative to the greater metropolitan area. So those rankings, you could argue, are a little bit skewed where they only talk about the city. Now, I'm not trying to say that the rankings are completely wrong and that St. Louis is great to live and that there's no crime whatsoever. No. I think that the way those numbers are measured is part of the reason we're always at the top of that list. But I think that that can be misleading a little bit if you have other cities on that list that rank lower down because they're looking at the metro area that might have millions of people, whereas in St. Louis, we're just looking at the city, which is like 300,000 people. Okay, I'm sorry, a little bit less than 300,000. I know it's about 300,000, but it's about 290,000 people in St. Louis City. And again, I'm not trying to steer you. If you're moving here, absolutely do your due diligence, whether you are moving to the city, the county, or somewhere else in the area. Just know, if you're moving anywhere outside the city of St. Louis, those rankings aren't necessarily talking about the area you're going to be living in. Now, number 4, St. Louis tends to be pretty spread out. It feels like things are kind of far apart, and St. Louis is really like a suburbs place. And what I mean by that is that you gotta have a car if you're living here. I mean, unless you're living in the city and you plan on staying within your neighborhood. Certain neighborhoods in St. Louis are definitely pretty walkable. It's easy to get around on foot, and same with some of the suburbs like Clayton and Kirkwood. It's pretty walkable. You can get around without a car. But if you're going one town over, or if you're in the city trying to get around from one neighborhood to the next, or go to the other side of the city, it's not very walkable. I mean, you're gonna have major roads and highways going through the place, and strip malls and parking lots that you're walking across if you're going from one neighborhood to the next. So for that reason, St. Louis is not the most walkable area. I was actually kind of surprised. One source ranked St. Louis 19 out of 30 as far as walkability. I would have guessed we'd be lower on that list. St. Louis just isn't the most dense place. Unless you live like in the same neighborhood as your place of work, you're probably gonna need a car to live here. And going along with that, number 5 is the fact that St. Louis public transit isn't the best. Now, there are proposals and funding underway to try to make this better and improve the public transit for those who need it to get to work and school and run errands. I mean, the fact of the matter is, if you're using the bus or the Metrolink, it will take you way longer just to get where you need to go, as opposed to if you had a car or if you Uber somewhere. Especially if you're trying to get outside the city and go through the suburbs, there's a lot of places that are kind of left out from the system, or it's just difficult to get around. And if you're going over to St. Charles County, good luck, because public transit's kind of non-existent over there. Public transit and walking are not the easiest ways to get around St. Louis. Moving on to number 6 is personal property tax. Now, this isn't a St. Louis thing. This is a Missouri thing. Wherever you go in Missouri, buying a car, buying a truck, even if you have an RV or a trailer here, the personal property tax is a pain in the butt. It is basically a yearly tax you're going to have on all of the cars, trucks, trailers, tractors, boats that you own in Missouri. So it's assessed based on what you have on January 1st. Now, moving on to number 7 that you might not love about St. Louis is, statistically speaking, a below average income level. I mean, the US median is about $75,000 to $76,000. Now, for St. Louis City, that was $48,000 in 2021. Now, I couldn't find consistent stats for all the counties for 2022 and 2023, so we had to go with 2021. But I'm sure the current numbers aren't that far off. So this is one of those things that's more so for the city. I know it's going to vary a lot depending on what you do for work. You might find your pay is above average, but you might also find that it is, below industry standards in St. Louis. Maybe it's different from the city to the county, but that is one thing that oftentimes comes up with St. Louis, is just the income level. Now, the good thing to go along with that is that property values here are also below the US median. So according to Redfin, I know right now the median house value in the US is $413,000. Now in St. Louis, the rolling 12-month median is about $245,000. And in St. Louis County, the rolling 12-month median is about $340,000. So in both cases, you're looking at below average income, but also below average cost of living. And even in St. Charles County, which is typically on the higher end with median home values, you're looking at $368,000. So it might be more expensive than other areas in the St. Louis metro, but when you look at the US median, we're still below that threshold. And finally, moving on to number 8 is kind of a complicated government structure. Now, this is not about politics whatsoever, but what you might notice that kind of complicates things every once in a while is stuff like the city and the county, right? The Great Divorce, that's a thing you'll hear about, where St. Louis City and St. Louis County became separate entities. And just in St. Louis County especially, you will notice there are a ton of local municipalities. There are almost 90 different municipalities in St. Louis County that all have their different rules, regulation, taxes. It's different everywhere you go. Now, don't get me wrong, it's usually not a huge difference, but things like your tax rates will be different depending on where you live and even where in each municipality and which school district you're in. Some places will have a certain inspection or an occupancy permit you got to get whenever a house trades hands. There might be some extra paperwork or just some kind of extra step you got to go through. And the local government is going to be different depending on where you go. So that's one thing that might be confusing, frustrating, anything like that. If you're moving to St. Louis, just the overwhelming amount of, if you're in an incorporated area, different municipalities, and then unincorporated area, it's a different story. Depending on your personal preference and your opinions, you might like that. Depending on where you end up, as far as government, politics, all that kind of stuff, it's going to be different from one place to the next. So really, like if you're moving to St. Louis, yes, these are some ugly things about it, but I still think there are a lot of good things that might make up for them, might not, depends on you, and that's a decision really only you can make. But again, if you're moving to St. Louis, if you want help with that process, buying a house, buying a condo, whatever you need, get in touch with us. Outside of that, thank you for watching. I appreciate it. And I will see you in the next one on the Living St. Louis channel.